Imagine you're the director of the CIA. It's the height of the Cold War. You're sitting in a wood-paneled office in Langley. The weight of the Western world on your shoulders. On a map across the room, lights blink over territories you can't see, and secrets you can't know. The fate of the free world rests on the intelligence your operatives can gather. Your enemies on the other side of the Iron Curtain are developing silent submarines, next-generation spy planes, and nuclear weapons with terrifying efficiency. Every day is a battle fought in the shadows, a battle you cannot afford to lose. Then, one of your top aides walks in. He slides a report across your desk, its contents so bizarre, so utterly unbelievable, it seems torn from the pages of a science fiction novel. He suggests that America's next great weapon isn't a satellite, a stealth bomber, or even a well-placed double agent. It's a man sitting in a quiet, nondescript room in California who can see inside a secret Siberian missile silo using only his mind. This isn't a movie plot. This is the true, documented story of one of the strangest, most controversial, and most secret projects ever funded by the United States government. A program that ran for over 20 years, cost millions of taxpayer dollars, and its results, to this day, are the subject of intense, heated debate. This is the story, revealed by thousands of pages of recently declassified files of Project Stargate. To truly understand why the world's most powerful intelligence agency would even consider betting on psychic powers, we'd have to go back to the suffocating paranoia of the early 1970s. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a deadly stalemate, a fragile peace maintained only by the promise of mutually assured destruction. Espionage was a life-or-death game played on a global scale, but the technology of the time had its limits. Satellites took hours to deliver their film, which could be obscured by cloud cover. Human agents were constantly at risk of being captured, compromised, or turned into double agents, feeding you carefully crafted disinformation. There was a constant, gnawing intelligence gap about what was really happening behind the walls of the Kremlin and inside their vast, remote military installations. It was in this tense environment that truly alarming reports started trickling in. Whispers from defectors, strange articles in foreign scientific journals, encrypted mentions and intercepted communications all pointed to the same disturbing conclusion. The Soviet Union was unjust researching paranormal phenomena. They were actively trying to weaponize it. There was talk of secret labs, psychotronic generators, and KGB programs designed to create a new kind of soldier. An operative who could, in theory, read minds during interrogations, trigger heart attacks from a distance, or even mentally disable critical military equipment. The most prominent name was Nina Kulagina, a Leningrad housewife whose telekinetic abilities were allegedly so powerful, Soviet scientists had filmed her stopping the heart of a frog in a laboratory setting. To the generals at the Pentagon, this wasn't a joke. This was the dawn of a terrifying new psychic arms race. If the Soviets perfected this, they could render billions of dollars of American technology useless. They could identify spies, discover nuclear submarine locations, and read battle plans without ever leaving Moscow. America could not afford to fall behind. The American response wouldn't come from a military base, but from a far more unlikely place. The prestigious Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, in California. In the 1970s, SRI was a hub of cutting-edge thinking, a place where brilliant minds explored the very frontiers of science. It was here that two highly respected laser physicists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, were risking their careers. They were conducting serious, scientifically controlled research into parapsychology, attempting to quantify and understand abilities that most of the scientific community had written off as nonsense. When the CIA got wind of their work, they saw a desperate, long-shot opportunity. They approached Puthoff and Targ with a simple, world-changing question. Could this remote viewing they were studying be controlled, enhanced, and ultimately used for intelligence gathering? The initial proposal was met with huge skepticism, even ridicule inside the agency's old guard. It sounded like something out of a comic book, but the fear of the Soviet psychic program was too real to ignore any possibility. No matter how wild, the CIA agreed to secretly fund a small pilot project, a low-risk high-reward test, to see if there was any fire behind the smoke. But they needed a subject, someone with raw, verifiable talent. They found him in a confident, charismatic, and sometimes abrasive artist from New York named Ingo Swann. Swann was no street corner psychic. He was an accomplished artist who had spent years exploring the boundaries of human consciousness. He claimed to be able to leave his body and project his awareness to distant locations, and he wanted nothing more than to prove it under scientific conditions. The Stanford scientists invited him for an initial experimental test so rigorous it was designed to expose any fraud. They put him in a sealed, electronically shielded room. They gave him a simple set of geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude for a location thousands of miles away. A location so secret, so compartmentalized, that not even the scientists conducting the test knew what was there. They simply asked Swann to relax, clear his mind, focus on those numbers, and describe so. The skepticism in the control room was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was it. The moment of truth. If Swann described a generic forest, a random city, the project was dead before it even began. The CIA's money would be wasted. But after several long, agonizing minutes of silence, the speakers crackled. Ingo Swann opened his eyes. He began to describe something specific, something detailed, something utterly impossible, and something that, if it were true, would not only validate his abilities, but would change the rules of espionage forever. The silence in the control room at the Stanford Research Institute was absolute. It was a sterile environment designed to eliminate every possibility of fraud. The scientists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, leaned forward, eyes fixed on the audio monitors. They had designed this test to be double-blind, meaning not even they knew the target. All they had was a set of coordinates handed to them in a sealed envelope by their CIA contact moments before the session. This was crucial. It meant they couldn't subconsciously give Ingo Swann any hints, a stray word, a glance, nothing. Inside a separate, shielded room miles away. Swann cleared his throat. He had been given nothing but numbers. The target could have been anything on Earth, but his first words were not vague. They were clinical, precise, and utterly unexpected. He described a massive circular structure, a giant dish antenna pointed towards the sky. He spoke of towering gantries, specific types of support buildings, a large crane, and the distinct, almost palpable feeling of high technology and intense secrecy. The scientists frantically scribbled notes, their professional skepticism warring with a rising sense of astonishment. After the session, they unsealed a second envelope containing the target's identity. Their blood ran cold. The coordinates were for the Sugar Grove Radio Telescope in West Virginia, a top-secret National Security Agency listening post, a place that officially did not exist. But this was just the beginning. The CIA, while impressed, was hungry for more. They needed to know if this was a one-in-a-million lucky guess or a repeatable, controllable phenomenon. In a later, even more audacious experiment, a CIA official challenged Swann to look at the planet Jupiter. This was years before the Voyager or Pioneer space probes would send back the first clear images of the gas giant. At the time, even our most powerful telescopes could only see it as a blurry, banded sphere. It was a perfect, unverifiable target. Swann, sitting in his quiet room, closed his eyes and began to describe things that sounded like pure fantasy. He described a faint, thin ring of debris orbiting the planet, something that leading astronomers of the day insisted was physically impossible for a gas giant of Jupiter-SA composition. He spoke of immense, continent-sized storms raging in the atmosphere, a turbulent, liquid-like surface, and even shimmering crystals of ice suspended high in the clouds. The scientists were intrigued, but baffled. The report was filed away. Then, in 1979, the Voyager 1 spacecraft flew past Jupiter. The images it sent back to Earth stunned the entire scientific community and forced the rewriting of textbooks. There, clear as day, was a faint, thin ring, exactly as Swann had described 6 years earlier. His other descriptions of the atmospheric storms and composition also proved to be eerily accurate. It was a data point so impossible, so far beyond the realm of coincidence, that even the most hardened skeptics within the CIA were forced to sit up and take notice. This was the birth of remote viewing. It wasn't about fortune-telling or communicating with spirits, as defined by Puthoff and Targ. It was a structured, Repeatable protocol, a mental martial art designed to bypass the conscious mind. A viewer and a monitor would sit in a room. The viewer would be given only a random set of numbers representing the target. Their job was to quiet their mind and fight a constant battle against what they called analytic overlay. The brain's natural tendency to guess and fill in the blanks with its own memories. They were trained to report only raw sensory data, shapes, colors, textures, sounds, smells, even emotions associated with the target. The results, called a session, were a jumble of sketches and impressions. It was messy, imperfect, but it was producing verifiable information that simply could not be explained. The CIA was finally convinced. The pilot program was deemed a success, and in 1978, the project was officially transferred from the CIA to the Army's Intelligence and Security Command, with a proper budget and a new, operational home at Fort Meade, Maryland. It was given its final, secret name: Project Stargate. The military's approach was starkly different. They weren't interested in scientific curiosity. They wanted actionable intelligence they could use on the battlefield. They began recruiting a small, elite team of military officers to become the world's first psychic spies. They weren't looking for artists or mystics. They sought out disciplined, grounded individuals, intelligence officers, aides-de-camp men trained for years to be objective observers. One of their first and most gifted recruits was a young Army captain named Joseph McMoneagle. He was the polar opposite of Ingo Swann, a straight-laced, by-the-book military man who, after several near-death experiences in the field, was left with flashes of intuition he couldn't explain. Under the rigorous Stargate training protocols, McMoneagle became viewer number 001. His targets were no longer scientific curiosities like Jupiter. They were the most closely guarded secrets of the Soviet Union. In one now-famous declassified session, McMoneagle was given coordinates deep inside the closed-off naval city of Severodvinsk. In northern Russia, he began to describe a massive, sprawling building on the coast, but it was what he saw inside that sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. He perceived a colossal submarine under construction, larger than anything he'd ever seen. He drew its unique shape a wide, double-hull design with 2 parallel rows of missile tubes. He reported it was a new, terrifying class of submarine, a true behemoth of the deep. At the Pentagon, analysts were skeptical. Satellite photos showed the building, but nothing definitive. Then, months later, a new class of Soviet submarine, the Typhoon-class, emerged from that very building. The specifications, the double hull, the missile layout, they were a near-perfect match for McMoneagle's remote viewing session. It was a staggering intelligence coup, achieved by a man in a dark room, thousands of miles away. The team had proven its worth, but their next missions would pull them from the depths of the ocean into the heart of global crises, testing the very limits of their strange and unbelievable abilities. The successful identification of the Typhoon submarine was a watershed moment for Project Stargate. It was no longer just a theoretical experiment. It was a proven intelligence asset. The small, secretive unit at Fort Meade began receiving more and more taskings, pulled directly from the daily intelligence briefs of the White House and the Pentagon. Their targets were no longer just static buildings or pieces of hardware. They were now tasked with hunting for people, tracking moving targets, and peering into the heart of active, unfolding international crises. The pressure was immense. A wrong piece of information could have catastrophic consequences. It was during this period that the team faced one of its most high-stakes and publicly known challenges: the Iran hostage crisis. In November of 1979, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. For the next 444 days, America was paralyzed, watching the crisis unfold with a mixture of rage and helplessness. Behind the scenes, every branch of the U.S. government was frantically searching for a solution. The military was planning a rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw, but they were flying blind. They didn't know the exact locations of all the hostages. Were they all still in the main embassy compound, or had they been scattered across the sprawling, chaotic city of Tehran to prevent a rescue? Satellites could show buildings, but they couldn't see inside. Human intelligence on the ground was almost non-existent. desperate for any possible advantage. The Joint Chiefs of Staff turned to Stargate. The remote viewers were tasked with one of the most difficult jobs imaginable: pinpointing the location and condition of specific human beings in a hostile foreign capital, thousands of miles away. The viewers conducted dozens of sessions. They described embassy rooms in detail, noting changes in furniture and the locations of guards. But one viewer, a talented operative named Hartlet Trent, perceived something different. He reported that one of the hostages, a man he described as having a specific illness, was not in the embassy at all. He described the man being held in a building that he perceived as a prison, and drew a sketch of its distinctive courtyard. This information was passed up the chain of command. Later, after the hostages were released, intelligence reports confirmed it. Hostage Richard Queen, who had developed multiple sclerosis, had been secretly moved from the embassy to a hospital, which was then used as a prison due to his deteriorating health. The details matched Trent's session in several key aspects. While the viewers' data wasn't perfect across the board, it was another instance of them producing specific, verifiable intelligence that was unavailable from any other source. The mission tragically ended in failure due to mechanical issues with the rescue helicopters, but the Stargate unit had proven its potential value in even the most complex human intelligence scenarios. The team's missions weren't always about living targets. Sometimes, they were tasked with finding lost technology. In 1979, a Soviet Tu-22 bomber, a high-tech aircraft packed with secret electronics, crashed somewhere in the dense, remote jungles of Zaire, Africa. The Soviets were desperately searching for the wreckage to recover their technology, and the U.S. was just as desperate to find it first. The search area was enormous, thousands of square miles of unforgiving terrain. The National Security Agency tasked Stargate with narrowing it down. Multiple viewers were given the coordinates of the plane's last known position and asked to perceive its current location. One of the most detailed sessions came from a viewer named Rosemary Smith. She described the plane lying on a jungle mountainside near a small village and a distinctive, winding river. She even drew a sketch of the crash site. Using her descriptions, intelligence analysts cross-referenced the drawings with satellite imagery. They found a location that matched Smith's drawing with remarkable accuracy. A CI-led team was dispatched to the area and, using the Stargate data as their guide, they located the wreckage of the Soviet bomber before the KGB could. These successes, however, did not mean the program was without its problems. Remote viewing was, and remains, an incredibly inconsistent phenomenon. For every stunning hit like the Typhoon submarine or the downed bomber, there were numerous sessions that produced vague, confusing, or simply incorrect data. The viewers themselves admitted that they were often wrong, and that the biggest challenge was distinguishing a true psychic signal from their own imagination. This inconsistency drove conventional intelligence analysts crazy. Spies and satellites produce hard, often repeatable data. A photograph is a photograph. A radio intercept is a radio intercept, but a remote viewer session was a subjective jumble of sketches and feelings. How could you risk a multi-million-dollar operation or the lives of soldiers based on a psychic's hunch? This inherent unreliability would be a shadow that hung over the project for its entire existence, leading to a constant battle for legitimacy within the secret halls of the intelligence community. Their next challenge would prove to be their greatest, taking them beyond Earth itself, into the vast emptiness of space. The constant battle for legitimacy defined Project Stargate's existence. For every mind-bending success, there was a frustrating miss, leaving analysts trapped in a gray area between provable fact and tantalizing possibility. It was in this gray area that the program's directors decided to launch their most ambitious mission. Their next target was not in a hostile nation, or even on planet Earth. It was 140 million miles away, on the silent, red plains of Mars. In 1976, NASA's Viking 1 orbiter had photographed a peculiar landmass in a region called Cydonia. Due to the angle of the sun, it bore an uncanny resemblance to a colossal, humanoid face staring up into space. NASA scientists quickly and publicly dismissed it as a trick of light and shadow, a planetary-scale inkblot test. But the image captured the public's imagination, and for the Stargate program, it represented the ultimate, untouchable double-blind target. No human on Earth knew for sure what was really down there. Joseph McMoneagle and other elite viewers were tasked with the mission. They were given only the raw geographic coordinates, nothing more. They had no idea they were looking at Mars. The results they produced are among the most bizarre and controversial in the project's entire declassified history. The viewers didn't just describe a rock formation. They described what they perceived as massive artificial structures. T spoke of pyramids, a ruined city, straight, intersecting roads, and the faint geometric patterns of ancient plazas. Most chillingly, several viewers independently reported perceiving the same psychic echo, a sense of a tall, thin, ancient race, ravaged by a planetary cataclysm that had stripped away their atmosphere. They reported a feeling of immense sorrow, of a civilization long dead, who had tried to build something to last forever. Was this irrefutable proof of an ancient Martian civilization, or was it the ultimate example of analytic overlay, where the viewer's subconscious, perhaps unknowingly influenced by years of science fiction, projected its own fantasies onto a random target? The data was too strange, too ambiguous, and utterly unverifiable. It was a fascinating experiment, but it also perfectly illustrated the program's greatest weakness. Without concrete, earthly verification, their incredible findings were, in the end, just stories. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the world that had created Stargate began to vanish. The Berlin Wall crumbled. The Soviet Union dissolved. The Cold War, the existential threat that had justified even the most fringe and desperate intelligence programs, was over. In Washington, the political climate changed overnight. The era of blank checks foreshadowing defense projects came to a screeching halt. Congress, led by politicians demanding a peace dividend, began slashing budgets. Fringe programs were the first on the chopping block. Stargate's primary justification, the psychic arms race, had vanished along with its enemy. The project managers who had spent years operating in the shadows now found themselves in the fluorescent lights of congressional budget meetings, trying to justify their psychic spies to skeptical lawmakers who saw them as expensive relics of a bygone era. In 1995, with the program's funding hanging by a thread, a skeptical Congress demanded a final, independent review. The CIA, the agency that had birthed the project 2 decades earlier, was now tasked with evaluating its final worth. They commissioned the American Institutes for Research, a respected independent organization, to conduct a thorough, classified audit of Stargate's entire history. The researchers, led by the prominent skeptic Ray Hyman and the statistician Jessica Utes, were given access to everything. Their final report would be the nail in the coffin. The conclusions were a perfect reflection of the project's own ambiguity. Statistically, the report found that the remote viewers were succeeding well above the level of pure chance. Jessica Utes concluded that the phenomenon was real. However, the report also stated that the information produced was inconsistent, rarely detailed enough, and ultimately not reliable enough to be used for making critical, real-world decisions. You couldn't send troops into battle based on a psychic's drawing. The official verdict was in. Stargate was a fascinating scientific anomaly, but it was not a viable intelligence tool. In late 1995, CIA Director John Deutsch officially terminated Project Stargate, and for the first time, he declassified its existence. The news hit the public like a shockwave. For over 20 years, the U.S. government had been running a real-life program of psychic spies. The story was a media sensation, featured on shows like Nightline. The men who had worked in secret for decades were now free to tell their stories. Their legacy is complex. Was Project Stargate a colossal waste of $20 million, a strange footnote in Cold War paranoia, or was it a courageous, top-secret exploration into the true nature of human consciousness? A program that came tantalizingly close to proving that the mind is far more powerful than we believe. The declassified files give no easy answers. They are filled with astonishing successes and inexplicable failures. They tell a story of a secret war, fought not with guns and bombs, but in the silent, uncharted territory of the human mind. And they leave us with one final, unsettling question. If this is what they told us about, what else are they still hiding?